High class, climate change, migrations, technological advances, and administrative innovations are going to contribute to the development of the world's first great empires. We're going to be talking about the Neo-Assyrians and then the Persians. They're going to employ two different approaches to consolidate and maintain empires. Many things will come together for these superpowers of the world to develop. And let's talk about what happened. Many developments influence a shift in the world during this time. Things like climate change, migrations, new technologies, and later administrative innovations. How are these empires going to rule? Toward the end of the second millennium, in 1200 BCE, Afro-Eurasian societies that had sustained much larger populations on higher agricultural yields are going to encounter another dry period, another series of droughts. And this is going to lead to some new social upheavals and human migrations across the major population centers. Places like Egypt, Anatolia, East Asia, people like the Hittites and the Greeks are going to feel the burden. And in tandem with these developments, the new ability to smelt and harden iron is going to lead to the replacement of bronze with this much harder metal. It's also going to be more abundant, though more difficult to extract and work with. New weapons are going to be created, like the crossbow. The Chinese invents the crossbow, and it's this forceful projectile weapon that could reach 50 to 60 yards. Armies are going to grow, and you need to supply armies, so roads are built. Siege warfare will be perfected. The new iron is going to allow for improved plows, which can till more land, harder land. Better plows and more tilled land means larger and more integrated societies could be supported again. Still, it does lead to the unfortunate rise of slavery. Class pack camels are going to start being used for transportation. This is an improvement. There's two types of camels, the Saharan dromedary, which has one hump, and Bactrian, which has two humps. And they help over these new overland trade routes. They can cross deserts and go long distances. Yet, has anyone seen a camel in person? Does anybody know what's wrong with them? Camels are mean, they bite, and they spit. I can vouch for that. Now, shipbuilding advances also are going to help empire building. New ships were built for open seas with larger and better reinforced hulls, stronger masts, rigging, and more sails. And innovations in steering and ballast allow mariners to venture to the open sea and to ports further than ever before. Now, equipped with these technologies, the Neo-Assyrians, the first regional empire in Afro-Eurasia, provides a clear early example of how expanding empires are going to make administrative innovations to control larger populations and territories. They're going to use mass deportations, class, to break the unity of the lands they conquer, and then they're going to enslave labor to work in order to integrate into their realm. They brutally exploited their subjects. To ease transportation of troops and resources across their lands, they're going to build roads and a system of garrisons and way stations. And these could also serve to receive tributes from their subject peoples and other goods. This template is going to be common among empires. Class, the Neo-Assyrians are the bad boys of history, and they rule from 911 to 612 BCE. And they really showed a lot of effectiveness of true imperial control, but they also revealed how constant harsh warfare and brutal exploitation of new subjects would be a feature of imperial rule, and it does cause some problems as well. Somewhat in contrast, a little bit later, we're going to talk about the Persians, who demonstrate a less violent form of rule over their multicultural empire. Class, this photo always gets to me. This is a 2006 photo from the Congo region during civil strife, and the Assyrians appear to be the first state power to employ large-scale forced resettlement and even genocide as a means of gaining control. Approximately 4 million people will be displaced in as few as 30 years during their reign. Now, considering there's only 100 million people worldwide in 500 BCE, that's a significant number. And this is a problem we still grapple with today, isn't it? Deportation and coerced labor were important tools that the Neo-Assyrians used to integrate their empire. Again, it served simultaneously to break down local resistance to their rule and also to build the empire's infrastructure and support its expansion. But more than that, armies they built were hardened and highly disciplined and huge, up to 120,000 soldiers at any given time. They included professional troops with officers promoted based on merit, not birth. They combined a variety of technologies and functions, including infantry and cavalry and iron weapons and chariots and siege warfare. Over time, they're going to integrate non-Assyrians who play specialized function in the military. Phoenicians, we're going to talk about in a second, are going to give them ships and sailors. The Medes serve as the king's bodyguards, and Israelites provided charioteers. Officers, again, could rise by merit, which really inspired all of the army soldiers. They were excellent siege warriors, using siege towers and battering rams. They were legendary for harsh punishments. The first stages of imperial expansion, the king would participate in these annual campaigns like Tiglath-Pileser III, who inspired hatred among his conquered peoples. Later, Sennacherib, and then after him, Ashurbanipal, also used the same methods to control people. Again, this deportation, forced labor, and a rigid social hierarchy are defining features of the Neo-Assyrian rule. And once they had established their rule, their empire was divided into two realms, the land of Ashur and the land under the yoke of Ashur. The former was the imperial core between the Zagros Mountains, the Euphrates, and the upper Tigris. There, the king's appointees ruled, and they were responsible for sending food to the temple of the national god Ashur, as well as manpower to work in the god's residence and officials to work in the state bureaucracy. Residents on the outside of Assyria proper were really not considered Assyrians. They had to pay much grander tributes of gold and silver, labor. This wealth will go directly to the king to support his lavish court and military costs. And class, they were really known for reliance of terror and brutality, legendary for their harsh punishments for those who refused to submit. Listen, there are accounts where they cut off ears, lips, fingers. They were known for castrations, mass executions, and again, large-scale deportation and forced labor. Like I said, they're the bad, bad boys. Now, this violent expansion, exploration, and inequality was justified by a complex system of propaganda. It argues that the Neo-Assyrians were pursuing a divinely sanctioned destiny in their expansion toward the Mediterranean, and that their national god Ashur demanded it of his people. The king was perceived to be supported by Ashur and to pursue this holy war, the aim of which was to subject the disorderly world to the well-regulated land of Ashur. Now, a three-pronged propaganda campaign worked to this end and included elaborate agricultural complexes, the composition of texts recounting the king's great achievements, and vivid images celebrating his brutal military campaigns. So, class, what do you think? Do we use military propaganda today? Of course we do. During our invasion in Afghanistan in 2001, when we declared war on terror, we dropped leaflets looking for the Taliban. And then in 2003, we invaded Iraq looking for weapons of mass destruction. And we also dropped leaflets offering rewards for information. We didn't find any weapons of mass destruction, but we did find their brutal leader, Saddam Hussein, in his little hidey hole. So the Assyrians, class, are going to use their previous exploits to let conquered peoples know what to expect, and it works. To manage this system, the Neo-Assyrians also developed a rigid hierarchical structure with the king at its head. He was divinely sanctioned as the agent of Ashur, and beneath him, highly rewarded military leaders formed a noble class with control of large quantities of land and peasants or the forced laborers. Now, this latter group was the majority of population, these serfs or peasants, required to work the fields of the elites. And Assyrians who were enslaved because of maybe debt, they still had certain rights, such as to marry, engage in financial transactions, and own property, including their own slaves. By contrast, slaves taken in conquest had no rights. And other peasants who were relocated to work new lands might be free, but they were attached to the lands that they had to work. Social norms governing gender relations were especially harsh and restrictive toward women, who had far less autonomy than in Sumerian city-states, like in the Mesopotamia region we talked about. Inheritance passed through the male line, and women's interactions with men outside the family were heavily restricted. And the Middle Assyrians of the 13th century BCE introduced the veil for all respectable women, that is, not prostitutes or servants, who would be beaten or even executed for veiling themselves. Though royal Assyrian women were subjected to these same norms, they had a more comfortable life and considerable status. Queens could also serve as a regent for a king if he were not yet of age when he became king. But class, all good and bad things come to an end, and the Neo-Assyrians are going to collapse around 612 BCE. As usual, keep in touch.